there's plenty more still to come out. And we hear from the Democratic Party Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez calling for the complete files to be released, which is what the law requires, John.
Yeah, so you've got to have a bit of a warning here. Any investigation by the FBI, by the Met here in London, even by us simple old journalists, you come across a story and you think it's shocking, and then you go to work and you try and check it out, and some of the time you're looking at a fantasy or a fantasist. And this happened here in Britain with this guy, Nick, who was a fantasist. But at the time, the police, they went into a big probe into Lord Bramwell, the former Chief of the Defence Staff, and Leon Britton, a great Conservative cabinet minister, and made their lives hell, and it was all based on nonsense. So that can happen. So to be fair to these people, you've got to keep remembering that we have the presumption of innocence. At the same time, for example, the picture of Andrew with this woman, but she's very, very slight. She could be a child. It's hard to tell. Her face is blacked over, and we don't know the context. But the photograph alone is horrible.
And that's the point, Annabel, isn't it? We don't know the context of all of these communications, emails, these photos, videos also. And we have to say that anybody who's named in these files is not accused of any wrongdoing. And, you know, we can't attribute any guilt to anyone, even if they're named in the files.
No, and Andrew, in particular, has stressed repeatedly that he hasn't done any wrongdoing. But even if you were to give the most generous interpretation, you'd say that he's displayed the most dreadful misjudgment. How is it that the future king's brother has found himself being photographed like this? I mean, it certainly hints at total debauchery, even if there's no illegal activity taking place, even if he hasn't committed any crime. And you know, Buckingham Palace must be having a fit at the moment, because they will have thought that this very drastic action that the King took last year when he removed all of the baubles from Andrew, stripped him of his titles, evicted him from Royal Lodge, I don't think has yet taken effect, but he will be moving to Norfolk. And yet still, there are these demands for him to face questioning under oath, for him to go to America and testify. And I just wonder if they're going to feel at some point they need to buckle under the pressure. But to do so would be even further embarrassment for the monarchy.
Well, let's take a look now at remarks by the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, repeating calls for Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor to testify before the US Congress, as you were saying. He was asked about the former Prince and sacked UK Ambassador Peter Mandelson during his final leg of his Asia trip. Well, he told journalists that Epstein's victims have to be the first priority. As for whether there should be an apology, that's a matter for Andrew. I've always said anybody who has got information should be prepared to share that information in whatever form they're asked to do that. You can't be victim-centred if you're not prepared to do that. As for Peter Mandelson, obviously he was removed as ambassador in relation to the further information that came to light in September of last year. I've nothing more to say about Peter Mandelson. Well, let's bring in our chief political correspondent now, John Cray. And John, is this the furthest that the Prime Minister has gone in terms of suggesting that Andrew should testify before US Congress?
Well, the key sentence there is where the Prime Minister says you can't be victim-centred if you're not prepared to do that, give evidence. So the Prime Minister is suggesting there that Andrew would be failing the victims if he didn't agree to testify. Now, he was asked, first of all, do you think it's time for Andrew to apologise to the victims? His answer to that was, well, that's a matter for Andrew. Now, just over a week ago, when President Trump made that dreadful slur about British troops in Afghanistan, when the Prime Minister was asked, should he apologise, the PM said, well, if it was me, I would apologise. So he stopped short of that, but perhaps he might say that in the future. Then the second question was, is it time for him to testify about what he knew? And that's when he said, as he said, as to whether he said, in terms of testifying, I've always said anyone who's got information should be prepared to share that information. But it's that new sentence where he says you can't be victim-centred if you're not prepared to do that. This will increase the pressure on what former Prince Andrew, now Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor. The fact that the British Prime Minister is calling on him to do that will no doubt lead to the calls from American lawyers acting on behalf of the victims, and also political pressure from here in the UK, because there are plenty of opposition politicians. I'm thinking particularly of Sir Ed Davey, who's raised this in the Commons at Prime Minister's questions and on other occasions. So the Prime Minister really is piling on the pressure on Andrew here, so as he would probably see it, to do the decent thing and tell the American authorities, Congress probably, what he knows. As for the former Prince Andrew, well, I guess he'd have to be dragged kicking and screaming to appear before Congress. It would take probably some sort of legal subpoena, some sort of legal move to compel him to appear for him to do that. He will not want to do that. And of course, there is always the possibility of more humiliating evidence or photographs to come, which of course will increase the pressure even more on the former Prince, now simply Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor.
Indeed, John, thank you very much for the moment. Well, Peter Mandelson, Lord Mandelson, also mentioned. And so far, our data and forensics team have reviewed over 30,000 images from the latest Justice Department tranche. They include an image appearing to show Peter Mandelson. They purport to show Peter Mandelson in his underwear and a T-shirt standing next to a woman in a bathrobe. We don't know when, where or by whom the pictures were taken. And a reminder, being photographed in the Epstein files does not indicate any wrongdoing. Well, Lord Mandelson has given us this statement tonight in which he says no one can say who or where the photo was taken. I've absolutely no idea or indeed whether it has any connection to Epstein. So back to John and Annabel. Various other information came out in relation to Peter Mandelson, Lord Mandelson, least of which the suggestion that he was being lobbied by Epstein to change government policy on bonuses for bankers.
Yeah, no, I thought that statement by Peter Mandelson was a bit rubbish, frankly. I did a podcast about this called Hunting Galena, which turned into a book, same name. And at one point, I got hold of the Epstein kind of address book. And one of the people in it was Peter Mandelson. And I phoned him up and I said, hello, Peter. Can you talk to me about your relationship with Epstein? He said, oh, yeah, I'm terribly sorry, I'm on a Zoom call. I'll phone you back immediately. And he never did. Surprise, surprise. And that response was, I mean, it's full of mush, but what's the substance? And, you know, the detail of this is that Mandelson's husband was given $10,000 by Epstein after Epstein had been convicted of being a paedophile. Now, there's a lot of stuff, and obviously your lawyers will be saying that's no evidence of wrongdoing. And I've got to look at that phrase, and I think, well, actually, morally, maybe not legally, but morally, it's wrong to take money from a convicted paedophile. It just is, and it benefited, you know, the Mandelsons as a couple, and that just feels wrong. Mandelson's a wealthy man. He lives in a fancy place in Regent's Park. He doesn't need this. He never needed this money. What's going on? And the next question, and maybe people on the Telegraph, Annabel, don't know the answer, but the next question is, what did Epstein get in return? Because Epstein's, you know, he was a massive manipulator and cunning and mercenary. So he gives $10,000 to Mandelson's husband. What does Epstein get for that? There are a lot of questions, and it feels to me that politically what Starmer's doing is, oh, Andrew, you should go and give evidence. Yes, he's right about that. But also Starmer's got questions. Why on earth did he appoint Mandelson ambassador? Because we all knew, even before this latest release of files, we all knew that that Mandelson had been pally with Epstein after he'd been convicted of being a paedophile. So it was a mistake to make the #1 diplomat in the country for Washington, D.C. Big mistake.
Annabel, your thoughts on whether this increases the pressure on Lord Mandelson to testify before US Congress?
I think that Keir Starmer, those words are going to come back to haunt him, aren't they? How can you call for Andrew to go to the US and testify and not expect Peter Mandelson to do the same? And there will be backlash on him, even if the primary focus is on the former ambassador to the US. So I think this is going to turn out to be deeply uncomfortable for the Prime Minister, and it will serve as a reminder that he stood up in September at PMQs and defended Peter Mandelson and said that he had his full confidence, and the very next day he sacked him. And it just looked very much as though he'd been pushed into making a decision that he didn't want to, and had he been given
Well,
the
he
choice,
said that was before he had the
full
facts.
information, but I think that's subsequently been disputed. It does look like a poor choice by the Prime Minister to appoint Peter Mandelson to begin with. You could see the temptation to do so. He is a figure who not only has, well, maybe not 9 lives, but 3 lives, but he's quite an emollient character. He'd be able to be quite obsequious towards the Trump administration at a time when Keir Starmer has somebody in the White House with whom he definitely doesn't see eye to eye, despite the fact that he has been able to nurture and cultivate quite a good relationship with the US president. So you could see the attraction of appointing Peter Mandelson into that role, but how they didn't foresee that this Epstein scandal was going to roll on and on and on with a growing number of figures, key prominent figures being pulled into it. I just don't know. Now, Peter Mandelson just a few weeks ago said that as a gay man, he wasn't exposed to and didn't see...
That's rubbish.
And well, that has been, I think, the response of the general public was that he was leaning on that, and he is an extremely sharp, intelligent individual, and how could he not have seen what was going on?